Welcome back. We've now finished that mammoth of a first section on Gen AI use, which focused on the use cases of Gen AI, but also the mechanisms of how it works and its strengths and limitations as a function of that. Now, we're going to shift tact and focus on the philosophies for AI use, understand a bit more about how TEXA, as the regulator of university institutions, as well as the Australian government, the advice that they've provided in terms of AI use, and also some case studies of what some examples of institutions have done and their approach to AI to help with the thinking of the different philosophies that are out there. So I'll start with the Faculty of Health Generative AI Community of Practice. This is something I established at the end of 2023. As I alluded to earlier, it was really to expand the conversation from the use of AI, not only in terms of ensuring the integrity of our assessments, which is really, really important, but also in terms of highlighting some innovations that could be tapped into for learning and teaching, improving time efficiencies in how we teach, improving time efficiencies for how students learn, and also being able to have personalized support, be able to have tailored content. I teach typically third-year statistics units and first-year units and in psychology, and they range anywhere from 160 to 300 students. And so I really pride myself as a teacher in trying to have connections with students and understand who they are and how they learn best and their background and how that influences their learning styles and behaviors and patterns and how to best connect with them the information. And when you have so many students, that can be a real challenge. And AI can pose a certain way to help with that challenge. And we've seen examples of this in terms of feedback delivery, in terms of learning through voice assistants in the previous examples. But what I did with the Faculty of Health Community of Practice, which has really exploded now to be something that is having impact beyond the faculty across the university and also other universities that are using the materials that are generated from this faculty community of practice, like these lecture slides and videos. It's really, the focus is to share ideas. We're all on this journey of learning about this technology and its implications and its use cases, and trying to train students and professional staff to be able to use it effectively and ethically. And so it's really about knowledge sharing. And so that was what the premise of this community of practice was and is to this day, which is about sharing best practice ideas, things that worked well, things that didn't work so well, challenges that people experience and how they overcame those challenges in practice, and helping to ensure that we're all progressing together on this journey. And so that's why these materials are available for the public. And so this is our broad scope in the early 2024, when it started to grow. We had some key activities that we wanted to develop, and one was a survey that I did of Faculty of Health staff to get a sense of their use of AI. So I administered the survey in 2024 and again in 2025 last year, and I was curious to see the differences in results. And I had a pretty good response rate, around 70 to 75. 71, 75 staff have completed the survey. And I only added one question in the new survey version, which was, did you complete the survey in 2024? And I said yes, no, and I was creating the survey late at night, and I thought, as a bit of a joke to myself, I'd put, I'm not sure, as a response. Well, it turns out the joke was on me, because most people, or a lot of people, were not sure if they had done the survey previously. I think we get lots of surveys, lots of times for different purposes, and really trying to work out which survey that was maybe was challenging. 12% of respondents had done the survey previously, 48% had not, and around 40% were not sure. So, and some percentage didn't respond as well, because it wasn't a mandatory question. So that was really an interesting insight and overview, but gives you a sense of the people across the years. But the first question I asked people was, had they previously used any Gen AI tools or applications in their work prior prior to doing the survey. And what I want to show you is the red bars here are those that were from 2024, and the teal blue bars are from 2025. And what we can see is that in 2024, the number of people who had used it was around 60% of staff had used it. So 40, almost 40% of staff had not used Gen AI prior to 2024. And then in 2025, we see a massive uptick. Close to 93% of staff have used Gen AI. And in part, I think that's a credit to what communities of practice can do, and so helping people learn about the technology and share learning. So I think that can have a big impact, as what we see in part here. But still, in 2025, there's around about 6 to 7% of staff who are not using Gen AI. So it speaks to a number of different possibilities and challenges, and I think that's pulled apart in some of the qualitative questions and responses, which I won't show here. But some staff in prior to 2024 were really seeking a framework and guidance as to how to use AI appropriately, ethically in their units. Many were still learning about what it was and how it applied and what it could do. And so this was really a reflection of many of those factors as well. So overall, we see more people using AI across the 2 years. When asked what applications or Gen AI tools that people use, and I put some common ones in there, the main trend we can see, most people were using ChatGPT in 2024 and similarly in 2025. This was multi-response, so they could select more than one response here. And that's why we see a massive uptick in Microsoft Copilot, as it became one that was supported by the University of Canberra. It was one in which many people learned that it's in the secure environment and what that means in terms of using that versus other AI tools. And so that allowed for a massive uptick in the use of Microsoft Copilot between 2024 and 2025. But across the board, you see broadly increase in use of these other tools as well. What's interesting is the use of other tools has actually gone down slightly, or remained the same, or gone down. And so perhaps speaks to staff seeking similar security in terms of using these other tools, and also raises questions about, if we're training students within the context of Copilot, you've already seen from the first part of this lecture all the different use cases in which AI could be used and with the different tools and functionality. And so if we're not utilizing those in ways, are we preparing our students? And in saying that, there's ways in which it can be used ethically. For example, if you're not working on content that's related to IP or your own IP, if it's something generic, for example, a foundational statistical lecture or content, that's something that students would be able to use something like Notebook LM and have it summarize Wikipedia pages, create a podcast about understanding confidence intervals, standard errors, or whatever the case may be, linear models, and use that for their learning. So in the same way, staff could do the same thing for using the different tools for their learning in a way that doesn't actually compromise any IP. So it's about considering, I think the step-like process is, does the information or chat that I'm having with the AI, or does the information I'm providing it, does it have any IP that is intellectual property that is of the ownership of the university or my own that I would like to retain? And if it's a low risk or unlikely to be in that case, then maybe that's an indication as to whether other tools could be used outside of a secure environment. It's not just everything should be secure by default. That functionality system comes in. So it's about making those educated guesses. And I think that's where these an understanding of how the systems work helps a lot. So I'd like, as a sort of community of practice, seeing that other increase either with the university strategy of embracing and including other technologies into its ecosystem. So it's like a toolkit of AI rather than a singular secured one from Microsoft Copilot, or in terms of this education process as well, or in addition to the education process of identifying whether data is sensitive or non-sensitive, and in which cases should you use, and if you're unsure, always go for the secure route. And I think that's a pretty good principle or framework to base it off of. So this is those are the two things I just wanted to show you as a real world case study example of how faculty within a university has gone along its journey in terms of the use and engagement of AI. Now, the Australian government had provided, had conducted an inquiry into Gen AI and provided some recommendations. There are many recommendations that are provided. What I want to pull apart here are some of these key ones in relation to that they encourage consistent guidance and uptake of Gen AI. They recommend that in conjunction with educational providers, encourage educators and staff to use Gen AI tools for appropriate tasks to help streamline parts of teaching administration, for example, lesson planning, timetabling, reporting, and simple grading for yes, no, or multiple choice questions. Recommendation 22 was they recommend that universities and TAFEs embed Gen AI competencies and skills across all courses and degrees, and that they work with higher education providers. So TEXA and higher education providers work together to develop standards and frameworks, including authorship policies, to guide universities in maintaining research and academic integrity. So I think this came out quite early in the piece a few years ago. And what I want to emphasize in the journey of AI is that the Australian government recognized that it was something that should be used. It should be used in ways for efficiencies to improve teaching and learning, but also it needs to be used ethically, and so have those considerations. And preparing our students for the workforce. And what that means is teaching them how to use AI so that when they go into the workforce, they can use it appropriately and ethically. And so TEXA as well has gone on a journey in terms of its position and use of AI, and they provided the position paper on assessment reform for the age of AI in 2023. And then towards the end of 2025, they said enacting assessment reform in the time of artificial intelligence. And so what I'm going to give you is a good overview of the high-level concepts within those papers, so you have a good understanding of where TEXA as a regulator sits on this. So their initial paper, TEXA Assessment Reform for the Age of AI, they suggest that assessment and learning experiences equip students to participate ethically and actively in a society where AI is ubiquitous. So it was essentially an acknowledgement that AI use is everywhere, and so it's important that we train students prior to sending them out so that they have some understanding of how to use it in ethical ways, and forming trustworthy judgments about student learning in a time of AI which requires multiple, inclusive, and contextualized approaches to assessment. Now, just on that point about ethical use of AI, it's an important nuance of discussion in terms of how do you define those ethics, and I think it in some ways goes beyond the scope of this course and the discussion, but there is some discussion to be had in regards to everyone's individualized approach and also the broad framework around the ethical use of AI, because ethics can also relate to the environmental consumption and impact of its use. It can relate to, of course, academic integrity and ensuring that you're using it in ways appropriate for learning. But I think also in the research side of things, even though the university has a closed system for AI, I don't upload, and I don't encourage anyone to upload data to it. And what I mean by data is in like data sets or data that's collected for the purposes of research. There's, I think, a few things that need to happen prior to that. I'm personally, and this is where the personal ethics versus the framework of ethics come up against one another. Personally, I struggle with the concept of feeding the data into an AI system when you don't know necessarily how that data could be utilized by the owners of that software. And there are cases where you could include in your participant information statement, hey, we're going to use your data in ways that will have AI. And so there's ways where you can inform participants, but I think that's really an essential part of the ethics of using AI. And I also think that it may not even be necessary to do it in these ways. You could rather than feeding AI your data, you can just tell it the structure of a data set. You could say, hey, I've got 5 variables, and those variables are some are categorical, some are coded in this way, and here's the structure of participants. Can you create a fake data set based on this structure, and then provide some frameworks for analyses or data cleaning approaches or whatnot? And already you are able to mitigate a lot of the risks of using patient data within an AI system and having a lot of the reward. It's, of course, it's always easiest to put stuff in and have stuff churn out. But I think we have to, I think in my view, the ethics of using AI comes through this lens of being thoughtful and considered with how it's used and in what ways and purposes. And so that's just how I train the research students that I who work with in terms of using AI. There's also, of course, the ethics of copyright as well. It's important to acknowledge AI, but also be aware that the fact that AI itself is using material from others. And so I think in instances where you can source material from the general source, if you can get it from there, that can be a useful way of ensuring that you're not in breach of potential copyright by proxy or copyright issues by proxy. So, like I said, that's a real brief synthesis. I'm sure there's much more of a conversation discussion to be had, and that doesn't cover everything, but there's some considerations I think are can be mitigated through this sort of dialogue of considering ethical judgments in research and teaching. So in the assessment reform for the age of AI, the assessments should emphasize appropriate, authentic engagement with AI, a systemic approach to program assessment aligned with disciplines and qualifications, the process of learning, opportunities for students to work appropriately with each other and AI, and security at meaningful points across the program to inform decisions about progression and completion. Much of this is really reflective of Sydney University's approach to AI through their two-lane approach. And they've been pioneers in this field, particularly Danny Liu, who has helped in terms of the frameworks for thinking about AI. He is involved in Cogniti in the video that I showcased earlier, and so is working closely with TEXA to help with shaping the framework around how we use AI effectively within higher education institutions. So the reason why I say that is because I'll come back to what a lot of this means when we talk about Sydney University's two-lane approach in a moment. Now, TEXA's enacting assessment reform in a time of AI. They suggest 3 pathways as to which different institutions can approach the use of AI. One is through assurance of learning across the whole degree program. And this is, you can think of it as this is the most effortful, time-consuming approach, but it provides the most effective way in some ways to address AI effectively across the degree program. So you comprehensively redesign assessment across programs to create coherent, integrated assessment regimes that captured valid evidence of achieving learning outcomes. So this may be that across a 3 or 4 year degree program, students are allowed to use AI, but there's critical points at which assessments may be invigilated. So they may be final exams or oral vivas, where you can assure the learning's occurring. And that learning of critical points, you say, look, this student has met these competencies so they can progress to the next year or the next stage, and then use AI in ways to help shape their learning. But at each critical point, there is some assessment that assures learning's occurring. So that's what they mean by the redesign, capture valid evidence of achieving learning outcomes. Assuring, and then the second approach is acknowledging, look, not every university can feasibly completely redesign their entire program and degree structure to address AI. They may not have the resources, time to be able to do so effectively. So there's the assurance of learning by unit or subject. So this approach incorporates at least some assurance of learning within each unit or subject. So in every unit, perhaps there's some assessments that are designed to be tasks that assess the critical competencies required for that unit, and then other assessments are enabled to use AI ethically and effectively for the students' learning. So this essentially provides confidence that one or more assessment tasks are completed without unauthorized assistance. So it's really assuring that the learning is occurring within each unit. The challenge with this is that sometimes it can mean that every unit has certain assessment tasks, such as like invigilated final exams, which may not be necessary with the first pathway approach, where those invigilated final exams or other forms of assessment are at critical points rather than every single unit. You think of every unit a student does in a degree, 3 or 4 a semester, and you compound that across their entire program. That's a lot of assessments that assess their learning in ways that may not naturally or authentically assess what information they know and how they apply it effectively. And then there's also assurance. The third pathway is assurance of learning occurs across degree structures, but some assurance remains within units only. So it's like a hybrid strategy of the first two. So it employs, there's some elements of program-wide reform and assurance of learning at a unit and subject level to create a balanced assessment regime. So that's another sort of hybrid approach between pathway 1 and 2. So that's the 3 pathways that TEXA have suggested, and that's what you're going to be seeing more and more across the higher education sector. And so here's sort of a breakdown, deep dive of what each of these pathways mean in the context of TEXA's suggestions. So assuring learning across the whole degree program. This is taken from those TEXA documents, which you can access in red here. So again, that's the holistic view of student development. The key characteristics of that is there's a coherent design. So assessment activities are intentionally designed as an integrated system aligned with program learning outcomes rather than isolated unit subject level tasks. So we're thinking, oh, well, we're assessing students in this way in this unit because they'll learn it in this way in that unit, and then they'll have some sort of invigilated or way of assessing learning at a critical time point. And so there's development progression that occurs, so more readily allows for assessments to build in complexity and sophistication. And there's multiple secure assessment points, so you can assure that learning is occurring at these multiple critical points. And there's a shared responsibility, so is the collective responsibility of teaching teams across the program rather than an individual unit convener. So I'm in the discipline of psychology, we would all come together and we would say, hey, these are the critical skills we need to ensure the students have at the end of first year, second year, and third year. And so these are the core assessments. And how do these assessments, how can we build in assessment integration across the program structure? So it's a programmatic approach. You can see already as I'm talking about it, it's very time intensive. It requires a lot of thought and effort to build, but it has a lot of rewards in terms of the student learning experience. So program level assessment reform represents the most comprehensive and aligned response to the challenges and opportunities posed by generative AI. By reconceptualizing assessments as a program level system rather than a collection of isolated tasks, it creates multiple interconnected and secure points of evidence that collectively provide robust assurance of student learning. So again, it's just that student experience and building continually on the units they learn. I think in many universities, even prior to AI, units were in some ways siloed. Someone taught this unit and then they taught it a way that they liked, and they may not have considered how it impacted subsequent units and the integration of information as well as assessments. And so this really tackles that in addition to embedding AI there. So programmatic assessment design has been around for a long time, but this is just a way of embedding AI considerations within that framework. So successful implementation is likely to require substantial institutional commitment and resourcing, being the key thing, including executive sponsorship, aligned policies, technological infrastructure. And in many cases, the transition requires significant upfront investment and carefully managed change processes to overcome resistance and ensure quality implementation. So those are some real key strengths and challenges of this pathway 1. For pathway 2, and this was the unit specific approach, every unit and subject coordinator is responsible for designing and implementing at least one secure assessment task within their specific unit. It's very straightforward identity verification. They're very simple to implement that verify the person is completing the assessment. And often this is a Viva, or like in-person question and answer or presentation that's based off of, that has questions after it. And in some ways you can assure learning through those pathways. We've seen examples of how that can't be assured if it's done online, because Gen AI can be used to generate these presentations, but it can be done in person. So it's control conditions, so assessments that restrict Gen AI or other assistants can be controlled under conditions that effectively enforce these restrictions. There's a proportion of unit or subject grade, so it's not possible to pass the unit or subject without having satisfactorily completed the secured task. So this means embedding a lot more hurdle assessments within each unit, which has implications on student experience and the stress that that may cause. Acknowledging that in the first pathway, those critical time points are also hurdle points, but when you have it at every single unit, then students encounter many more hurdle assessments. And varied formats. So secure assessments can include oral presentations, in-class tasks, supervised practical demonstrations, or a number of other formats. People are trying to get more innovative in terms of how they're addressing this, but largely these are the mechanisms that people use. So this approach aligns with traditional academic structures and preserves unit and subject level autonomy, potentially facing less resistance than other approaches. So it's sort of, there's an easier uptake of this approach and provides clear evidence of integrity measures to stakeholders concerned about qualification validity at the level of individual tasks. Essentially, we want to know whether a student who has graduated with a degree, we can assure that the skills required of that degree, the learning outcomes they have met and they can do. And so these are mechanisms by which we can assure that that learning is occurring. Successful implementation requires investment in assessment design expertise, infrastructure, and quality assurance processes. Institutions must carefully manage the risk of over-relying on examination-based formats that may limit the assessment of complex capabilities and create an overly granular learning experience for students. So this is really the main limitation of this approach. Every unit largely has a very highly weighted final exam, and so it doesn't necessarily assess student learning in different modes or modalities, and these can be challenges in terms of education. Now, the third one was that hybrid approach that we had discussed. So rather than securing every individual unit or subject or redesigning the entire program, you identify critical groupings. So for example, I teach a third-year statistics unit in psychology. There's a second-year one and a first-year one. So that could be grouped into one where we're coordinating skills that progress through that progression, as well as Gen AI competencies and foundational skills. So that leads to strategic unit and subject groupings. Unit subjects are strategically grouped for coordinated assessment design. There's progression evidence focus. Assessment is designed to assure evidence of progression towards program level learning outcomes at key junctures. And there's selective integration. So assessment key tasks are integrated across selected units and subjects where connections are most meaningful for demonstrating achievement of program outcomes. So it could be that within a series of units that students are doing, they do it 4 units across their program that are all connected, and maybe in the first and third or second and fourth, they have these critical junctures. So you can see that programmatic level thinking, but it's just in a smaller bunch of units within a degree structure. And there's the responsibility for the assurance of learning is shared between program level coordination and unit subject level implementation. So there's ownership across designers, unit conveners, lecturers to help one another with this process. Again, the ethos of programmatic design has been around. This is just embedding Gen AI within that approach. And the reason why there's not a large uptick is it's just very difficult for a number of reasons, probably beyond the scope of this workshop series, but universities, there's large numbers of sessional staff which come and teach different units, and so they may not be there year to year, or there may be high turnover. And so the ideas in a programmatic design across years may not be as sustained than if there's staff that are continuing within a program, and a whole bunch of other factors as well that really make the investment in the design also just different approaches. If you control your own unit, you can teach it in a way that you think is best. And if you have across a set of units or a whole course, you have different people with different ideas as to the best way to teach different things, which can be more challenging. So it's just group work at its fundamentals, but there are more barriers to implementation than at the unit level approach. And this is why we see the unit level approach, I think, with the largest uptake. So for the third hybrid approach, the combined approach of assuring learning within groups of units offers that flexible strategic response by selectively implementing program-wide assessment principles in some areas while maintaining unit subject level assurance of learning in others. Institutions can balance immediate integrity assurance with longer term educational enhancement. And I've seen instances where you can see very thoughtful programmatic design within degrees, and the thoughtfulness that goes within the assessments has flow on effects to student experience and their learning, and especially when they can see that it all matters. If students should know already that what they learn in first year of course translates to second year, but sometimes the ways in which universities operate, it encourages students to think at a unit level and say, well, I'll pass this unit and move on to the next one. And then they sort of don't connect the learnings from the previous unit to the next one. So if assessments connect to one another, it's more likely students see the interrelationship between content and knowledge between units. So it's very effective for that. And it's particularly valuable for complex programs with multiple specializations, or as a transitional strategy for institutions moving towards that first pathway. So what are ongoing challenges across pathways? So critical consideration across all pathways is how learning can be assured. I think this is number one challenge in terms of mode of assessment. The traditional division between synchronous, time-bound, often supervised, and asynchronous, which is flexible, unsupervised. So synchronous being live in person, asynchronous being what you're doing now, which is in your own time. Assessments, it's being reconsidered in light of Gen AI capabilities. So the viability, integrity, and validity of assessment activities conducted in digital environments remain of significant concern. So all pathways come with a warning that it may be all too easy to revert to inequitable assessment formats that focus on assuring learning. So TEXA has this large caveat of, hey, everyone, we don't want you to all go to final exams in every unit or final exams for every degree structure and program, and they're trying to encourage people to think differently in terms of how to assess with Gen AI in mind. So what I'm going to run through now in terms of the philosophies of AI, now you have a good sense of government suggestions in terms of we should use AI, we should use it in ways, we should train students to use it, staff to use it effectively, use it ethically. We have TEXA, who have gone on this journey of understanding what the best approaches could be for different institutions, and then providing this, I guess you could describe it as a 2-lane, 3-lane approach, or 2 pathways and a hybrid approach, where they say how you can address it at the unit level, at the program level, or in a hybrid manner. And now I'm going to talk about some case studies about different universities and their approach, and you can see how TEXA has influenced in these ways, as well as the Australian government. So I have to start with Sydney University because, as I said, they've been leaders in this space with their suggestion of the 2-lane model very early in the piece when AI came into play. So their foundational premise is that AI will only continue to improve. Any take-home assessment could involve AI use. It's not possible to ban AI or reliably detect AI. So we cannot outrun or outdesign or outprompt generative AI. Our students must master the productive and responsible use of AI. So any take-home assessment perhaps should involve AI use. And that's sort of the train of logic that led Sydney University to their approach of, if AI can be used, maybe it should be used. And in ways where we want to assure learning, that's where we need those secured forms of assessment. Uh, what we see across the sector is that there are still attempts to outdesign, outrun, and outprompt generative AI. There are still ways in which people are trying to design assessment tasks that are AI proof. Um, but what we've seen in the last few years, and as predicted by Sydney University when this position came out, is that AI changes in ways that are only getting better, and it require the assessment investment, the time investment in modifying those assessments to meet the current limitations of AI may not remain when AI continues to evolve and improve. So I think those are important considerations. Um, so they have a two-lane approach. Lane one is assurance of learning outcomes. So this can be thought of as a secured form of assessments. So in the short term, if you want to assure the learning has occurred so that the student has met the learning outcomes and they're demonstrating to you that I've learned these key learning outcomes. This can be done through in-person exams or tests or viva voce as an oral examination. But through the longer term, it can be through skill-based assessments run during tutorials. So many clinical disciplines within the Faculty of Health have this naturally embedded through what they call OSCEs, and medicine as well has similar approaches where you do an assessment within a lab. Maybe you have a simulation with a patient, and you have to um, use your clinical judgment to make a decision, and that is what is assessed. So, but also viva voce, which is or other interactive oral assessment, in-person exams or tests, used sparingly and designed to be authentic and for assuring program rather than unit level outcomes. So you can see the elements of Texa's position, which reflect Sydney Uni's two-lane approach. So what's lane two? Well, it's just the human AI collaboration where relevant. So in the short term, students use AI to brainstorm, draft outlines, summarize resources, perform research, and analyze content. And in the longer term, students collaborate with AI and document this process. And the documentation of the process demonstrates the learning, and that's what's graded. So it's how they're using AI, and that's more heavily weighted than the product. And I think one thing to keep in mind when considering the design of your assessments is ensuring that AI doesn't become the focus of all assessments. It's sort of a tool that supplements it. And I think a challenge that I've seen in terms of the redesign of assessments is sometimes it focuses a bit too much on how students are using AI or their knowledge of AI, when really it's the knowledge of the learning outcomes that should be used. If the learning outcome is about how they're using AI effectively, of course, but ensuring that the path you go down within this process doesn't detract from the core learning of the content and the knowledge that's there. So here's a beautiful overall summary of lane one and lane two. Lane one is assessment of learning. It's mainly at the program level and secured in-person assessments. The Gen AI may or may not be allowed by the examiner, and you could see how they could have an assessment where they're doing it in front of you, demonstrating the learning outcomes and just using AI as a tool within that. And it aligns with the TEXA principles, and examples are oral assessments or viva voces. Lane two is that open level of assessments, mainly at unit level, and its AI can be used as relevant or scaffolded, aligns with that ethical use of AI in principle one. And it's really to provoke reflection, suggest structure, brainstorm ideas, and really improve clarity and provide formative feedback. So it's about encouraging the students to use AI. The challenge as well with the approach where it's at the unit level, where I guess in some instances, unit conveners are saying, well, we shouldn't use AI in these ways, and others are saying you should use it in these ways, is students can get mixed messages. And I've certainly seen that where students are told by one unit convener not to use AI and others to use it, and then it leads to this confusion as to what's appropriate use. And this largely reflects institutional challenges in terms of creating a strategy. So the beauty of the two-lane approach is that it highlights a mechanism for how everyone can think about AI. Really, it's AI use by default is there, and where learning needs to be, assessment of learning is required. That's where you use these types of assessments. Um, as with all GO8s, they try to outdo one another. And so UNSW provided the 6-lane approach. And so that's really levels of no assistance, simple editing assistance, planning design assistance, assistance with attribution, generative AI software-based assessments, and then not applicable. So Gen AI is not considered to be of assistance to you in completing this assessment. So really it ranges and it's more nuanced in terms of where it fits in the spectrum, and it gives unit conveners a bit more of a guidepost as to for each assessment how it should be used. And so that is another approach in terms of the usage of AI within higher education. Really, the fundamental premise is there of either not having AI not applicable or not used, so it's not considered to be of assistance to you in completing the assessment, or sorry, it's of no assistance, so it's the assessment's designed for you to complete without any use of AI, or it's allowed to be used for the assessment, and then somewhere in between it can be used for certain purposes. But really, it just reflects those core attributes by Sydney University. And similarly with University of Canberra, University I'm part of, the generative AI position statement for 2026, we've sat somewhere in the middle of UNSW and USyd. So the principles of it is that the integration of AI is based on that the assessments align with mapped learning outcomes, its application reflects industry relevance or is identified as a professional capability requirement, and then where Gen AI is permitted or required, students are scaffolded to use AI effectively and ethically, and how to appropriately acknowledge its use. And that's critical. We really need to ensure that we're helping the students understand how to use it effectively and use it in ways that are ethical. And I think fundamentally that comes down to transparency of use largely, when you transparently explain how you've used AI and in what ways and for what purposes, and that allows you to ensure that it's ethical, or helps with the ethics of it. And so this is a beautiful diagram that's been generated for UC's position, and I guess you could describe it as a 3-lane approach, where you have the permitted use of AI. So AI can be used in any ways the students see fit for completing the assessments, and the main thing is that it is done in an ethical manner. And then you have the restricted on the other end of the scale, which is that AI, the use of AI is not allowed in completing the assessment. And then in the middle, you have this guided approach where students are guided and they may or must use AI in completing the assessment. The may use AI is an interesting one as well, because it acknowledges that some students may not want to use AI, and if it's not part of the learning outcome of their degree program, which is becoming less and less likely, but if it's not part of the learning outcome, then they are open to having that choice, because there's data implications as well of them using AI, particularly if it's outside of the university's secure environment. But the must category is really where there's a learning outcome where Gen AI skills need to be demonstrated, and so that's where the must fits in. So I guess it's a 4-lane approach. Really, I guess hopefully you're taking away the framework here, where there's open use, there's restricted or closed use, and then there are these middle cases where it can be. And these are the different flavors different universities and institutions are taking. What I really like about this approach is that it really emphasizes one of those TEXA principles, which is about ensuring that students are taught how to use AI. And so when they must be used or may be used, they are provided with the guided practice as to how they should be using it effectively. We also have studiosity writing feedback, which is why we've used the term restricted rather than not allowed or not permitted, because students are able to use studiosity plus across their degree program for all assessments. And this is a way in which they can use AI to obtain feedback. And in some ways similar to Cogniti example you saw in that video, where it has safeguards within it embedded in how it's designed to ensure that people don't say use it for ways that don't really support learning, like just write this essay for me, here's the instructions. It won't actually allow for that to occur. So that is UC's Gen AI position statement. So those are the three case study position statements. You'll see nuances around them. I think really anchoring within Sydney University's two-lane approach gives you a good understanding of Texas position as well in terms of programmatic design of assessment, which they'd love to see from every university, acknowledging the time and effort investment that that requires. They've provided this unit level guidance or a hybrid approach, if possible, to sort of embed towards that programmatic design of assessment. And in the same way, when we're thinking about assessments, what I like about the UNSW approach is that it shows you the different ways in which you can think about assessments. It could be multiple of these. You're using assistance with attribution and planning and design. I think being transparent about the use of it is really critical here. What we'll see moving forward, I think, is there may not be many universities, or if any, that restrict the use of AI. And I think largely that's because unless every assessment item is secure, then there's always going to be capacity and use cases for how AI can be used and misused in terms of education. And that first lecture really gives you many good examples of how it can be used for essays, how it can be used for presentations, and used for all sorts to complete quizzes very quickly. And so fundamentally, I think we have to ask ourselves, when someone graduates from a degree from a higher education institution, are they meeting the learning outcomes that that degree should warrant, which is the integrity of our institution, of saying this person can do the skills that they've graduated from. And I think in the years between when AI was becoming widely used, I don't think many university institutions could reliably say that. And I think these positions are really important because now more and more people are taking action and using it as something that is productive to help students with their learning, help them become qualified professionals and use it ethically, and in ways that enhance their overall skills and attributes, rather than not allowing its use as a broad scope. Now, as I said at the start of this, there's still people in the Faculty of Health, as a case study example, who do not use AI, and I'm not convinced that this is because they cannot or do not want to, they cannot use AI. It's likely in discussions, and I think this is reflective more broadly. There are people who don't wish to have AI within the system of higher education. And in some ways, this is the sort of other viewpoint of what is AI doing to our ability to critically think, for our ability to be able to analyze and critically discuss issues. And so in some ways, the argument from Sydney University is that AI is out there, it's being used, whether we like it or not, and in some ways, having a design or approach that can allow us to address it effectively, in addition to use it innovatively in our learning and teaching, may be the best way to ensure that we're assuring the learning, but also students are able to learn effectively with AI as well. So I think it's important, before finishing this section, to just acknowledge that there are staff across many universities who do not like AI. They don't want AI. Maybe you're watching this video and you don't like AI, and that's completely fine. I think it's an understandable position. I think there is many great assessment tasks which really help people learn, which are no longer as effective in helping people learn in this day and age as they were 10 years ago or 5 years ago even. And so the challenge is, how do we think and move with the technology to ensure that we design new assessment tasks that make us feel the same way that some of those old assessment tasks made us feel with the what we had around us. So I think using it as a tool to support learning is a useful way to think about AI. Hopefully that gives you a good sense of all the flavors of philosophies for AI use, and maybe in crafting your own position and use case for AI. What we'll do is we'll take a break there, and we'll come back and we'll get stuck into prompt engineering. So stretch your legs, have a tea, and then we'll come back in a moment.